Queens and kings of Swift, we're going to turn you into random number royalty because we're going to be working with randomization in Swift. We're going to generate random values for ints, doubles, and bools. We're going to cover printing 3 ways with commas, plus signs, and string interpolation. We're going to learn about sorting arrays and shuffling arrays. And we're going to fit long messages into labels. There's a lot to learn. Let's get at it. Steve Jobs used to say that part of the magic of Apple products was the ability to surprise and delight. Well, we've got a lot to learn about surprise and delight, but one of the ways that we can surprise users is through randomization. So let's learn how to work with random values in Swift. And just a reminder, if you didn't commit and push after the last video, why don't you go ahead and do that now? And so let's learn about randomization in a playground. So I'll go up under File, New, Playground, create a blank playground, save it to my desktop, and I'll call it randomness. And I'll double click on the title bar to expand to full screen, and I'll delete the str variable. I don't need that. So let's start by simulating a 6-sided dice roll. And if we're going to do that, we want to come up with a random number between 1 and 6. So first, let's create the value. We'll say let dice roll equals. And now if we want to generate a random value, we first specify the type that we want to randomize. So if our numbers are 1 through 6 and they don't have any decimals, we'll use ints. If we say int dot and we start to type the word random, Xcode will give us a bunch of options. And I'm going to select this first one that says random in closed range. Press return, and then we'll type in the range. And what the range is it's the range of numbers that we'll consider. So we put in our start number, which is going to be 1, then we say dot dot dot, and then we say 6, which is the last number we'll consider. That's it. Then press return. We'll see our number in the results pane on the right, but why don't we go ahead and print this out below in the console. So we'll say print, you rolled a, and then let's use string interpolation. So that's slash, open and close parenthesis, and if I click in between the 2 parentheses and start to type dice roll, code completion knows that value exists. I'll press return to accept that, then I'll do a shift return to run my code. Up top it says running, and down below it says you rolled a 6. Now before, when we wanted to re-execute our code, we did a shift return again, but if you want to generate a new random number, you're going to have to go down to the bottom, click on stop, and click on play again. But if you do that, you'll see the status up top will change to running, and you should see a new random value down below, unless you rolled 2 consecutive values. So all right, I rolled a 2. I'll click on the stop square, then the play triangle. I rolled a 4. Looking good, working good. So we just generated a random integer value. Can we use other types? We can. So we haven't used doubles a lot, but why don't we give it a try with a double? And we mentioned doubles earlier. We said this is the choice of a type if you want to have decimals. So in this example, why don't we generate a random decimal value between -1 and 1? So we'll create a constant called random decimal equals. And since this is going to be of type double, we'll type in double with a capital D. All types are upper camel case. And then we'll do dot random. We get the same selection that we had before, but now just notice the type is double instead of int. So I'm going to press return here to accept this option with closed range. And the range for any decimal value from -1 to 1 is -1.0 dot 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 1.0. Shift return, and we get a very long decimal number over on the results pane on the right. Why don't we go ahead and print that out too? So I'll say print your random decimal between -1 and 1 is, we'll do string interpolation and put random decimal in here. Shift return, and maybe I need to do stop and play. And we get our value, and that's a lot of decimals after the -0. But it worked, and it worked just as expected. So let's give a try with bools, because we know bool is another type. So bools generate true or false. Why don't we create a constant let true or false equal bool dot, and we see that random for bool doesn't have any range parameter, and that makes sense because you're only going to be true or false. So we'll press return, and why don't we print that out as print, the answer is, and I'm going to show you another way to use the print statement. So I'm going to close quotes here, then put in a comma, and then put in the value true or false. Now the output we'll see in the console will be the answer is, and now pay attention to the string literal I typed in. So the answer is closes the double quotes right after the S. There's no extra space in there, but Swift will add that space, and then it will print out either true or false, whatever's generated. So now in our video series, we've covered printing 3 ways. We've used comma-separated values, we've used a plus sign to combine 2 strings, and we've used string interpolation. So let's create some notes with all 3 examples listed. So I'm going to put a comment up here that says printing 3 ways, and we'll put another comment in here just to say number 1 using comma-separated values and literals. And let's put a comment on the second line that says 2 adding strings using a plus, and then why don't you pause here and see if you can remember how to do that using a plus instead of a comma. Pause. Unpause, and hopefully you got it. And our answer using the plus sign to combine different strings is just print, the answer is plus. Now if we try to just add true or false, we would be doing the same error that we had before, where we're adding a string, and in this case it's a bool, but we know how we can convert values to a string. We just put the type string with a capital letter in front, surround the value we want to convert to a string in parentheses, And one more thing, this plus sign that combines the literal with this converted value is not going to give us a space. The comma did, so we'll need to put a space in after is and before the double quote. And another comment is going to be 3, using string interpolation. Give this one a shot too. Pause. Resume. Hopefully you got this right. It's just print. We put in the whole string literal there. The answer is space. Then slash open and close parentheses, we put true or false in there. Anything inside those parentheses is converted to a string. And I'll shift enter to run this code, and you'll see all 3 give you an identical answer. The answer is false, the answer is false, the answer is false. Notice we've got the correct number of spaces in there as well. You'll see all 3 of those. They're pretty common in Swift code and example code. Most of the time we'll favor string interpolation. And now it's time for a challenge. And in fact, you know enough to do 3 challenges. These challenges are pretty easy, so I'll give you all 3 in a row. And for the first challenge, we'll be inspired by my youth in the 1980s. And as you could probably guess, I was pretty geeky. And what geeks did in the 80s, if you've ever watched Stranger Things or the TV show Freaks and Geeks, you know they played Dungeons & Dragons. And if you've ever played Dungeons & Dragons before, you know they have lots of different kinds of dice. In this particular example, I want you to imagine that you've got to calculate a roll of 3 4-sided dice. So I want you to take the playground that you've got, I want you to write some additional code, create a value called result. That's the sum of 3 4-sided dice rolls. Print the value as you rolled a, and then whatever result is. Challenge number 2, coin flip. I want you to use a bool to write playground code that will simulate the flipping of a coin. Print heads or tails depending on the result. And 3, I want you to go back into your You Are Awesome project, grab the messages array from your app, then return to your playground and write code that will print a random message. And the code should consider all the messages, even if you add new elements to the messages or remove elements from messages. So there are your 3 challenges. Give them all a shot, and then I'll show you my solutions. Hopefully you'll get them. Get ready for your pause. Pause! Wait a little while. And resume. All right, challenge champions, let's go ahead and solve this first one. And my results below are a little crowded, but I don't want to delete the code I have above. I think that's some pretty good notes I want to keep. So if I want to add a blank line, I could just type in print, empty string, Xcode will add a blank line down below in the console. Now in the first one, we want to create a value called result. So we'll say let result equals, and then we want to generate a 4-sided dice roll. So it's going to be int.random. Our closure is going to be 1.4, and then we're just going to repeat this 3 times, adding them all together. And then on the next line, we'll say print, you rolled a, and with string interpolation, result. Shift return, you rolled a 9. I'll print another empty string to give myself another blank line. And up next is the coin toss. We're going to use a bool value to print just head or tail, so we can do it a bunch of different ways. How about this way? If bool.random, we've got no range because it's just true or false, equals true, open curly. If it's true, we want to print heads. Else, we want to print tails. Now that's one way, but let me show you how we can change the true condition. And to show you this, I'm going to copy the code I just wrote, paste it down below, and I can actually get rid of the equals true at the end. The reason I can do that is that an if clause will evaluate if something is true or false. And when I do bool.random, that will give me a value that's either true or false. So I don't need to say true equals true or false equals true to evaluate that. I could just put in the bool.random because it's already true or false. And take a look here this last time that I ran. The first if-else statement evaluates tails. The second one evaluates heads. Both if conditions work the same way, but you don't need the redundant equals true. Super. Let's do another print empty string to give ourselves another blank line. Then go back into our You Are Awesome project. Select our messages array that holds all of our strings. Command-C for copy. Head back over to our playground. Paste it in. And if we want to show a random message value in here, all we need to do is say print messages. Open close bracket, and now inside this is where we put our random value in. Now we've got 4 elements in messages, and since elements are 0 indexed, our first one is going to be 0, our last one is going to be 3. So that's our int range. But instead of putting a 3 as the end of our range, let's think about this. If we change the size of our range, what we want to do is we want to go up to messages.count, but remember also because we're 0 indexed so that we're not out of range, we want to say messages.count -1. Let's do a shift enter. You are fantastic, and so is this result. I'll stop and run again. Fabulous, that's you. Wonderful. Let's add another value and make sure everything is working if we change the number of elements in the array. So I'm going to add as another value in here, when the genius bar needs help, they call you. Build and run. Oops, I got an error. I forgot the comma after this new element. Put the comma in, build and run. You are awesome shows up. I'm just going to click build and run a few times to make sure that I can see when the genius bar message is in there. And I also want to see fabulous, that's you, making sure that I can see the last one in here. I don't get an index out of range. You should know this is going to work though. Your code that you wrote is really sound. And perfect. We've solved for all 3 challenges. Now, since we're working with randomness and arrays, I thought I'd show you 2 more techniques in here that we're not going to use immediately in this app, but that are really useful for you to know as a developer. And those are how you can shuffle an array and how you can sort. So I'll put a comment in here that just says, some more techniques, shuffle and sort. And I'll demonstrate these techniques in an array of names. And for simplicity, they all begin with one of the first letters of the alphabet, A through E, but I'm going to enter them out of order. So we'll say var names equals Claire, Adam, Dina, Estevan, and Bruno. And now we're going to use the shuffled method, and I want to create a value that's going to hold the shuffled name. So I'm going to say let shuffled names equals names dot, and as I start to type in shuff here for shuffled, I see a couple of options in here. The first one on my screen says shuffled, and the description says returns the elements of the sequence shuffled. Now the sequence means the array, and just to the left of shuffled, you see that it shows a string array. And so that means in this case, since we're using shuffled on a string array, we're going to return a string array that's shuffled. And in this case, since we're returning an array, we're creating a new shuffled array, but we're not going to change the order of the original array. Let's print out the results so we can see. All right, print names equals names in string interpolation, and print shuffled names equals shuffled names in string interpolation. Do a shift enter, Xcode moves all my code up. And we see that names is in the same order that we entered, but we get the shuffled names, which is in a different order. Nice. And I'm going to print some empty strings in here just to give myself some blank line spacing in my results. And there's another function for shuffling too. So shuffled with an ed at the end didn't impact the original order of the array. That remained intact. But there's another function in here. If we do names.shuffle, we see shuffle is up here. If we look at the description, it says shuffles the collection in place. That means it takes this original value, in our case names, and it's going to shuffle those values so they're going to be permanently changed. Also notice just below this, to the left of shuffled, what we used before with the ed at the end, we have string in brackets. That means shuffled with an ed returns a string array. Shuffle, which we're about to select, the one that shuffles in place, it'll shuffle the original values, says void next to it. That means it doesn't return any value. It just works on the value it's called on. So we'll press enter and accept this, and we'll print them out, and we'll just say print names after shuffling in place, string interpolation names. And we see the original was Claire, Adam, Dina, Estevan, and Bruno, and names after shuffling in place is Adam, Estevan, Claire, Bruno, and Dina. That looks good. I'm going to get rid of this extra blank print line in here. I don't want that. And I'll run again, and we get different results for shuffled names and for shuffling names in place too. Good. Now let's look at sorting. Now sorting actually works very much like shuffling does. So in the way that we had a shuffled and a shuffle function, we've got a sorted and a sort function, and they work the same way. Sorted returns a sorted array. Sort will sort in place and change the original array. So I'll put a comment in here, sorting, to indicate that we're doing sorting stuff below. And let's create a constant. Let sorted names equals names dot, and I'm going to type in sort, and let's look in code completion at the options. And this first one I've highlighted is sorted, just like shuffled. And if we take a look at the description, returns the elements in the sequence sorted, just like shuffled. We see just to the left of this, it shows a string array. That's what's being returned. And by the way, the M's that you see to the left here, these are methods. And what they are, they're functions that are attached to different data types, and you access them via dot notation. Just under that, we see that there's a sort as well. Let's try sorted first, so we'll press enter and accept that. And on the next line, we'll print sorted names equals sorted names in string interpolation. And before printing this out, let me also show you how you can create an array that's sorted in reverse alphabetical order. So we'll say let reverse sorted names equals names dot sorted, and then inside of the parentheses, we're going to say by colon and then a greater than symbol. So essentially we're saying, hey, sort it by one value is greater than the other value. We'll press enter, we'll say print reverse sorted names equals string interpolation sorted names. Shift return, let's run. And look at that, sorted names is in A to E alphabetical order, and reverse sorted names is in E to A alphabetical order. Nice! And just to make sure that we understand this sort option, we'll say names.sort. Remember that sort's in place. We'll say print names after sorting in place equals string interpolation names. And if we do a shift enter down here, we see, in fact, we've changed the original names array and it's now sorted in alphabetical order. Looking good. So here's your last challenge, and this is where we go back to our app. So I want you to do is use what we've learned when we experimented on the playground to get a random element of the messages array to show, and modify your You Are Awesome project so that when the message button is pressed, you'll show both a random message from the messages array and a random image from the set of images in your assets catalog. So why don't you pause, give that some thought, and we'll come back and solve it together. So ready? Pause. And resume. We're back. Let's solve it. And now that we've got this knowledge in how to generate random values and how to put them inside of message strings, it is remarkably easy to apply the knowledge we have. So I'm going to highlight exactly this line that we wrote before, this bit that does messages, and then in my brackets I've got the int random number from 0 to messages.count -1. Copy that, head back over to viewcontroller.swift, and I can comment out all of this stuff over here that I had previously used when setting the messages label. And now while previously I used the code that I copied to print, I'm going to say message label.text equals, and then paste that code in here, and that's just going to go in and it's going to get a random value from 0 to messages.count -1, slap it in as the index value for messages, and then take that string element and put it in message label.text. And why don't you add a couple more elements to the array? I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say, how about when the genius bar needs help, they call you. And I'm also going to add at the end here, you've got the design skills of Johnny Ive. Johnny Ive is the former chief design officer at Apple. By the way, both of these messages that I added are a little longer than the other ones. I want to specifically show you what happens when a message is too long for its label, and I'll show you 2 fixes for that as well. And now we need to generate random images. The technique's going to be really similar, so I'm just going to highlight and comment out this code that I'd use to show the images one by one. And I'm going to grab this line here where I actually update the image view, because that's what I need to change. I'm going to paste that right underneath my message label line. And instead of using this image name, which was a constant that we created down here, remember all of our images start with the word image. And then in between here, I want to put in a number, and I want that number to be a random number. So I'm just going to say int random, and it'll be 0, ... And our last image is 9. So remember, 0 to 9, we could do this. Or something that would be a little bit better programming practice is if we created a constant up here and said, let total number of images equals 9. This actually just makes our code a little bit easier to read, because somebody might be reading this and wondering, what does 9 mean? Oh yeah, it means total number of images. Plus, if we add images, we just go right up here to the top of our code and make the change in one spot. So this should work. And look at all of this code we changed to just 2 lines. So build and run, and let us see if our code has unleashed the awesomeness of randomization. And here we go. Click show message. Looking good, looking good, looking good. Oh, remember I'd said those 2 messages that I added were deliberately chosen because they were a bit longer. Look what happens when we have a message that's longer than the label. We get a ... at the end. So let me show you how we can fix that. And the 2 ways I'll demonstrate are both on main storyboard. So let's click on main storyboard. I'm going to click on a label, bring up the attributes inspector for the label. And we see one of the attributes says lines. Now, there are these little stepper buttons on the side of it. I can increase the number of lines for any text which is in here. So I can go up from 1, which is there by default, to 2, 3. If I set it to 3, then my text will wrap across 3 lines. I'm still going to be limited by the number of points I use to constrain the height of this label. But if I've set my lines to 3, and I can fit 3 lines into that height, then I'll show 3 lines. Now here's another solution which is a little less intuitive, but more flexible. If I go in the opposite direction and set my lines to 0, which seems like it makes no sense, that will offer an infinite amount of lines. Now I've still got to be able to see it in the labels constraints, but setting it to 0 is an even better solution. So let's build and run, click show message a few times, cycle through, and we see when the genius bar needs help, they call you. It is now on 3 lines. We didn't set it to 3, we set it to 0, but those 3 lines can fit into the constraints we set for the height of the label. Looking good. Let's try this other option. We'll come back to main storyboard, and you'll see halfway down the attributes for labels, we have one that says auto shrink. By default, it says fixed font size, but we can select minimum font size or minimum font scale. Either one will work. Xcode will provide some defaults in here. I'm going to select minimum font scale. The default in there is 0.5. That means it'll scale the font down to 50% the original size that was set by the attributes if it can't fit everything in the space that's provided. And I'm going to tweak one more change here just so that you can see it. Our genius bar message was actually across 3 lines, and we could show 3 lines because our lines were set to 0. I'm going to set lines to 2 now deliberately, so that we squeeze that genius bar quote down to 2 lines, and you'll see the font will get a little bit smaller. So let's build and run and check it out. And here we go. We'll click on show message. The first one shows the genius bar quote, and notice it's on 2 lines instead of 3 lines. The font is shrunk down. So we learned a lot in this lecture. We covered randomizations for different types, shuffling arrays, both with shuffle that created an array and shuffle which sorts in place. We covered sorting in arrays, both with sorted that creates a sorted array and sort that sorts in place. We did them both alphabetically as well as in reverse order. We completed several challenges and we learned how to fit long messages into a label. Coder, I hope you feel your Swift skills are becoming stronger and stronger. Keep at it.